All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for being here with me today. I'm your host, Nolan. Lots to touch on here today having to do with the Middle East. We haven't talked about it recently here on the show, but there were a lot of events this weekend that deserve to be talked about, so we'll get into it here today. The first one is Israel's attack on a Hamas military commander named Riyad Saad. He was killed over the weekend in Gaza by an Israeli airstrike targeting his car in what can only be described as the most blatant violation of the ceasefire that Israel's committed so far, and there have been many. And leaks from the White House, according to Barack Ravid from Axios, signal that the Trump administration is very upset with this. So we'll talk about all of that today, as well as what happened in Syria over the weekend, with 3 Americans getting killed by an ISIS gunman. And that raises the obvious question of why are we still in Syria? So we'll tackle that question and so much more today on the Quest for Clarity podcast.
It is about who we are. It is about what we believe.
They're building up this case just like we did in Iraq. Build up the war propaganda. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
The more you tell the truth, the stronger you become.
Mr. Speaker, we're not rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic tonight. We're putting coal in the boiler and setting a course for the iceberg.
Maybe we should improve the liberty of our own country before we seek to do so abroad. Some of us have paid attention to the fact that the expert class, including the foreign policy experts, lie all the time. The correct answer to this, of course, as it always is liberty. All right, everybody, before we begin, if you wouldn't mind going right down below this video and hitting like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate that. Also, if you wouldn't mind going to my Instagram, X, and Spotify and following all those pages over there, I'd really appreciate that as well. Let's get into the show. Let's talk about our first topic, which is, of course, Israel's attack on the Hamas commander, killing him over this weekend in Gaza. We'll start off today by reading antiwar.com, Dave DeCamp, his analysis of this event from just yesterday. And he goes, quote, Hamas confirmed on Sunday that an Israeli airstrike in Gaza a day earlier killed Riyad Saad, one of its senior commanders, as Israel continues violating the ceasefire by launching attacks on the Strip. Saad was killed by a missile strike on a car in Gaza, which killed 3 of his associates and wounded 25 others. Axios reporter Barack Ravid said in a post on X that Israel didn't inform the U.S. about its plan to target Saad. Israel did not inform the Trump administration in advance about the assassination of Riyad Saad. The Americans were only updated after the fact, he wrote on X, citing a senior Israeli official. According to Hamas, Saad worked as a commander of the group's military manufacturing unit, and someone has been picked to replace him, though the new commander wasn't named. According to a report from the New York Times last year, most of Hamas's explosives are manufactured from unexploded Israeli bombs that are dropped on Gaza. So, yeah, again, over the weekend, Israel launched attacks in Gaza, killing one of Hamas's senior military officials. And as much as we can all sit here and say that, yes, this guy was not a good guy, this guy reportedly, or at least according to Israeli allegations, was one of the lead architects of the October 7th attacks. So, again, not a good guy. But that's not the question here. The question isn't whether we can say he's a good guy or not, because it seems pretty clear he wasn't. The question is, do we have a ceasefire in this war or don't we? And if we're answering that question, I mean, that question, it doesn't seem like we do. The tangible facts we can say we have like an official pen to paper ceasefire all day long. But if that never tangibly is expressed by both sides, and you have the Israelis killing the leaders of the other side, then how can we in reality at all say that we have a ceasefire when very clearly one side is refusing to cease fire? And that is why the United States seems very upset at this. We have leaks from Axios today that we'll get to in a second that say the Trump administration is very upset with this. And the Israel defenders today trying to defend this, you see, if you go on Twitter, you would have seen them. The Israel defenders today, when the news broke that Israel had launched this attack, they hadn't named who was killed yet. They were like, wait until the people within the Israeli government, the spokespeople, were saying, wait until you see the identity of the guy killed. He was a bad guy. He needed to go. This was justice. Even if we granted to these guys that all of that was true, that this guy had committed heinous acts and he was a terrible guy and he needed to be killed, then you're admitting in that you don't have a ceasefire, because you know what the other side thinks of Benjamin Netanyahu, you know what the other side thinks of IDF commanders. But if people in Gaza started shooting at IDF commanders who were along the border, or they tried to assassinate Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israelis would never accept that. So where do they get off thinking that the Palestinians are just going to accept having their leaders taken out? While if anyone ever, even if a kid throws a rock at a IDF tank, they just feel like they have the moral justification to kill like 200 Palestinians in a day. So there's no consistency here from the Israelis, and there really isn't any consistency here from the United States either, which is where we come to the U.S. reaction to this from Barak Ravid. And before we get into the specifics of this, I do just want to make it clear. It's really hilarious, this routine we have now. So since the ceasefire got enacted, we've had the constant breaking of the ceasefire from the Israelis. The Israelis feel completely inclined to do whatever they want because they know that this is what's going to repeatedly happen. The United States refuses to ever actually condemn the Israelis openly. The one time that Trump really condemned the Israelis was during the Iran-Iraq war, the 12-day war is what we'll call it. I keep calling it the Iran-Israel war. The 12-day war from back in June was when Trump tried to get a ceasefire down, and then right as the ceasefire went into effect, the Israelis launched a big bombardment of attacks against Iran. And Trump went out in the streets. We showed it here on the show back when it happened. He said they don't know what the F they're doing. And everyone on Twitter just ate that up. They're like, oh, he finally attacked the Israelis. When in reality, that was just a one-liner. And tangibly, we did not threaten to withhold aid. We did not threaten to withhold weapons. We didn't even threaten to withhold diplomatic support from the Israelis when they did that. It was just a one-liner to express that he wasn't very happy with it. And that's the repeated pattern. Actually, we've seen less than that throughout this entire ceasefire. The Trump administration had a rotating team of diplomats going in and out of Israel from the first weeks of this ceasefire to ensure that it stayed. You had Marco Rubio, you had Steve Witkoff, you had Jared Kushner, you had J.D. Vance. All these guys kind of circling around Israel during the first couple of weeks to ensure that Netanyahu didn't do anything to violate it. And even amidst all of this, we are refusing at all to acknowledge the fact that they've broken the ceasefire multiple times. And even when they break the ceasefire, we have people like Marco Rubio in our government, when this blatantly goes against our interests of peace in the region, making justifications for it. And then simultaneously claiming, while this is happening, that there's still a ceasefire in place. So it's been incoherent. And now we have, once again, a leak. We never get direct statements. My point of this whole statement is this: we never get direct statements directly condemning what Israel is doing when they break the ceasefire. We get these very light, very soft scoldings. We get reports, leaks from Barak Ravid and Axios repeatedly of very stern phone calls or threats to blah, 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 blah. We get these very weak statements from the administration, and they're not even directly from the administration. We get leaks from Barak Ravid. So we'll start off here. This was Barak Ravid in Axios today. He says, quote, "The White House sent a stern private message to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, stressing that the killing of top Hamas military commander over the weekend constituted a violation of the ceasefire agreement brokered by President Trump, two U.S. officials tell Axios. The angry message from the White House comes amid growing tensions between the Trump administration and the Netanyahu government around the next phase of the agreement to end the war in Gaza over Israel's broader regional policy. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, White House envoy Steve Witkoff, and Trump's advisor and son-in-law Jared Kushner have become very frustrated with Netanyahu, according to the two U.S. officials. Netanyahu is expected to meet Trump in Mar-a-Lago on December 29th. And then it goes into the behind the scenes here. It says, quote, "The White House message to Netanyahu was, quote, if you want to ruin your reputation and show that you don't abide by agreements, be our guest. But we won't allow you to ruin President Trump's reputation after he brokered the deal in Gaza," a senior U.S. official said. The Israeli official confirmed the White House was unhappy, but claimed the message was milder. That, quote, certain Arab countries considered it a ceasefire violation. According to two U.S. officials, the White House was unequivocal that Israel had violated the ceasefire. See, even here, we have the Israelis undermining the reports from the United States. The United States, these officials who are leaking to Axios, are making it very clear that the U.S. sent a very stern message, whatever that even means, that they don't want Netanyahu to hurt Trump's reputation in this, because if Netanyahu just breaks the ceasefire, that's an embarrassment to Trump, who worked long and hard to get the ceasefire in place. And then you go and ask the Israelis what their interpretation of this message was, and they're like, oh, it was milder. He just said Arab countries thought this was a violation of the ceasefire. So even here, you have blatant disrespect from the Israelis, who are contradicting the U.S. statements. And the obvious question is, where do they get off doing this? Because if you were a country, say you were like the leader of a country, about 9 million people, and your entire defense and so much of your country for decades has been propped up by this bigger country, let's call it the United States, of the population is about like 350 million people. Would you, as that smaller, much significantly smaller country that relies so much on the bigger country's welfare, would you just like brazenly disrespect that country both militarily and in terms of your rhetoric? Or would you try to like win that country over so they continue sending you checks? The fact that Israel is in the first camp with that and that they're blatantly disrespecting the president, have no concern with that, it makes you wonder, why does the United States just take this? Because they don't take it with any other country. There's never been a country like this where the United States is so terrified, seemingly, to publicly condemn. Like, if we think back, even in this Trump term and in the first Trump term, Trump was basically weekly condemning the Europeans. He's condemned Zelensky multiple times, these guys who are supposedly, according to like the official State Department, not like the official State Department statements, these countries in Europe and with Ukraine are technically U.S. allies. But Trump feels no fear at all in openly condemning these countries. He brought Zelensky to the White House and sat him down and screamed at him in front of all the cameras for the entire world to see for about 20 minutes straight. And even other countries, whether it be Russia, who he's called out multiple times for not working with them to bring peace to the Ukraine war, whether it be China, when he's called them out for taking advantage of us on trade. Why every other country in the world can be so openly criticized, and correctly so, but this one country in the Middle East, this one country with about 9 million people in the Middle East, that's fairly insignificant on the global stage, why that one country is the third rail, and you're never ever allowed to criticize it. And if the Trump administration seems genuinely scared to publicly criticize it, and they go through the entire process of leaking to the press to try and get the message across, it's bizarre. It's, at the very least, it's very bizarre. And of course, if you watch this show, then you would know the significant role that the Israel lobby has on the U.S. government. But it's, from just a PR perspective, the fact that the administration cannot seemingly criticize the Israeli government or the Netanyahu government at all is very bizarre. And especially, by the way, when they've not only gone against the ceasefire multiple times, they've just blatantly broken the ceasefire. We don't publicly condemn them for that. And by the way, that's not it. They voted when J.D. Vance was in town for a symbolic annexation of the West Bank just days after Donald Trump made the public statement saying he won't allow Israel to annex the West Bank. What does the Knesset do? The Knesset that is in a country entirely propped up by the United States, they hear that from the president, and then they go and vote symbolically against his wishes. They're laughing in our face as they do it. And then also, just a couple weeks ago, the Knesset in Israel was voting to proceed with the next phase. They were voting on proceeding with this next phase of the ceasefire. And you know who voted against it? The Likud party. The Likud party, Benjamin Netanyahu's party, the party of Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, the people in Netanyahu's direct government voted against this because they don't want this. They've made it very clear. Netanyahu's own ministers have threatened to leave his government if he allows this to proceed much further. They're calling not only for an annexation of the West Bank, which they have been for years, but they're also calling for the Palestinians to be literally moved out of Gaza so they can annex Gaza as well. They're very open about this, and all of this is against U.S. policy, yet we put on this pretend face all the time. We have our ambassador, Mike Huckabee, all the time, just making a mockery out of everybody and acting like Israel is our number one ally that can never be criticized. He acts like a representative of Israel, not a representative of the United States. And we'll just end off before we move on to the National Guardsmen killed in Syria, I just want to end off the Israel topic by showing you the most absurd clips I think I've ever seen on the internet from a Q&A that Mike Huckabee did, some weird Q&A he did sitting at some table, answering questions about the U.S.-Israel relationship. Here we have the first clip, which is Mike Huckabee talking about whether or not Israel actually attacked the state of Qatar. And we all know that they did. They did attack Qatar back on September 9th. They attacked Doha. They attacked the Hamas people in Qatar. And here is what Mike Huckabee... This is how Mike Huckabee's mind interpreted that attack. Take a look.
Was Israel's attack on Qatar without cause or merit. Well, let's be real clear. There's been some talk that Israel attacked the country of Qatar. It did not. It did, in fact, send a missile to attack a terrorist who had been partly responsible for the murder of Israeli citizens, but it did not attack the country. There was one missile. It was aimed at one person. Now, unfortunately, there were some people who were near that missile strike that were injured or killed from it. But that was not an attack on the nation of Qatar.
Now here, well, this is what I mean when I say Mike Huckabee works for the Israeli government more than he works for the American government. Mike Huckabee is the ambassador to Israel under the Trump administration. Okay, just make it clear. He is the U.S. ambassador to Israel under the Trump administration. Okay, so Israel, as he says in here, well, he doesn't even say it in here. Israel attacked Qatar back on September 9th. They launched strikes against Hamas leadership within Qatar. And they failed. Hamas leadership survived the attack, but a number of people were killed who were not Hamas leadership. So, by definition, they killed people who they were not targeting. And then the insane part is that he's using just Israeli propaganda talking points when his own boss, the president of the United States, came out and made Netanyahu apologize for this attack. So Trump made, if you remember, in the Oval Office, Trump made Netanyahu call the Emir of Qatar and apologize. Now, Mike Huckabee, just a question for Mike Huckabee. If Israel didn't attack Qatar, then why does Mike Huckabee's boss make Netanyahu apologize to the leader of Qatar? So who is this guy working for? That's the blatant question here. Who is Mike Huckabee working for? Is he working for President Trump in the United States? Or is he working for Hezbollah Israeli propaganda? The last clip of Mike Huckabee I want to show you real quick was his insane answer on Jeffrey Epstein. Take a look.
This is another question that is Israel blackmailing the U.S. government with the Jeffrey Epstein files? Again, what a ridiculous kind of unfounded, unverified allegation. It emanates from someone's imagination, but nobody's provided one shred of evidence to indicate that there's any truth to it. Reckless allegations, whether it's against an individual or a country, are just that. They're reckless and they're harmful. Just like no one would want to have people say crazy things about them individually or their families, people ought to push back when anyone, whether it's a podcast host or just somebody making a speech, gets up and says something as unfounded as that somehow Israel was behind Jeffrey Epstein.
So Mike Huckabee, he believes that there is no evidence to suggest that Jeffrey Epstein at all was associated with Israel. Actually, there's not only no evidence, Mike Huckabee believes it's basically blasphemous to consider or to say that Jeffrey Epstein was involved with the state of Israel. Well, Mike Huckabee is either running propaganda willingly or he is just blatantly ignorant on the entire details of the Jeffrey Epstein situation. I would present Mike Huckabee with a couple big pieces of evidence here, and he could look into this on his own. Over the past couple weeks and months, there have been leaked emails from Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel, where he and Jeffrey Epstein are very openly in collaboration over official Israeli state policy. There was Jeffrey Epstein directly basically organized a meeting between Vladimir Putin, yes, Vladimir Putin of Russia, and the leaders of Israel. So that's a little bit bizarre, don't you think? Also, Jeffrey Epstein and Ehud Barak were directly in communications over trying to find ways to make money and profit off the Syrian civil war. In fact, Jeffrey Epstein was trying to lobby on behalf of the Israelis and on behalf of Ehud Barak, the Obama administration, to do certain things in Syria to help Ehud Barak and Jeffrey Epstein profit off of it. This is confirmed. This has been released in leaked emails from Ehud Barak, laying this all out there. He also helped negotiate between Israel and the Ivory Coast a security agreement. Same thing with Morocco. So the idea Mike Huckabee is going to just insult our intelligence like this, when this information is all publicly available, he's going to say there's no evidence. Actually, not only is there little evidence, not only is the evidence that I just provided inadequate to him, he says there's no evidence that Israel and Jeffrey Epstein were at all entangled, aligned, working together on anything. He would have to have no idea what he's talking about, which he doesn't. He obviously has no idea what he's talking about. He's just speaking just speaking something that he has no idea what he's even saying. So it's just, again, Mike Huckabee obviously works on behalf of Israel. He doesn't work on behalf of the United States, because if he did, he wouldn't be speaking Israel's position on Qatar or Jeffrey Epstein. He'd be going by the United States position on these topics. It's that simple. But now we'll move on here to probably the bigger story, which is the fact that 3 Americans got killed in Syria over the weekend, including 2 members of the National Guard, 2 Iowa National Guard members. And we'll start off here by reading the Associated Press article on this about the 2 National Guard members. And it says, quote, the 2 Iowa National Guard members killed in a weekend attack in Syria that the U.S. military blamed on the Islamic State group, which is ISIS, were identified Monday and remembered as dedicated soldiers. The U.S. Army named them as Sergeant Edgar Brian Torres Tovar, 25, of Des Moines, and Sergeant William Nathaniel Howard, 29, of Marshalltown. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds ordered all flags in Iowa to half-staff in their honor, saying that, quote, they are grateful for the service and deeply mourn their loss. Pentagon's chief spokesman, Sean Parnell, said that a U.S. citizen working as an interpreter was also killed. 3 other guard members were wounded in the attack, the Iowa National Guard said Monday, with 2 of them in stable condition and the other in good condition. The attack was a major test for the rapprochement between the United States and Syria since the ouster of autocratic leader Bashar Assad a year ago, coming as the U.S. military is expanding its cooperation with Syrian special security forces. Hundreds of U.S. troops are deployed in eastern Syria as part of a coalition fighting IS, which is ISIS. Why? This raises the obvious question of why is this? Why is it crucial? Someone explain it to me like I'm an absolute idiot. Why is it absolutely crucial to our national defense that we have our National Guard deployed in Syria? I would argue it's more crucial that we have the National Guard deployed on the southern border. Why don't we do that? If they're not, they should either be deployed on the southern border or they should be at home with their families. There is no excuse in the year 2025 with Al-Qaeda in charge of Syria and ISIS running wild in eastern Syria that we should have American National Guardsmen sitting ducks in Syria waiting to be attacked by some crazed gunman. It's absolutely reckless and ridiculous. And this is just a complete... And by the way, on this topic, I would recommend everyone look up some Pat Buchanan clips on this or read some Pat Buchanan books on this, because Pat Buchanan was absolutely correct on this topic of empire, which I've brought up here a couple times on the show. This idea that the American empire has gotten way too expanded abroad. It's blatantly obvious. We have bases in almost every country in the world. And for what purpose? We claim that they're peacekeeping. But in what world would we be trying to peacekeep between the new Syrian Al-Qaeda regime and ISIS? In what world is that necessary to our the United States strategic interest? It makes absolutely no sense in the year 2025. You would think that we would be trying to get our troops out of harm's way when we have 2 radical Islamic terrorist organizations fighting over Syria, which again isn't crucial to our national security. You would think that would be a perfect time to say, okay, maybe we should pull some troops out of here because it's become a very unsafe situation. And is it really worth the potential cost of having some killed in a terrorist attack to, for some reason, do quote-unquote peacekeeping in Syria, which we haven't even done? There's still ongoing fighting in Syria. It makes no sense. Either we're there and we have to declare... This is the ridiculousness of U.S. foreign policy. Either we need to declare war in Congress and have a vote on this in Congress. This is like the Constitution. We should either declare war and actually have an adequate amount of troops there to fight for a determined purpose, or we should pull out. We shouldn't have this weird medium where we have a couple hundred troops in Syria just waiting to be sitting ducks. And as Rand Paul correctly put it back in the first Trump term, when Trump was trying to pull out of Syria, Rand Paul went on The View and correctly put it like this. He's like, you had Sonny Hostin on The View saying that it's symbolic. We're protecting the Kurds in Syria. It's symbolic that we have like a dozen National Guards members in Syria. Rand Paul was correct, and he said, you tell their parents that. When a bunch of them get killed by one suicide bomber, when our half a dozen service members in Syria who are there for quote-unquote symbolic reasons, peacekeeping reasons in Syria, when they all get wiped out by one suicide bomber. You tell their parents that it was symbolic. You tell them about the symbolism of keeping them in harm's way in a country occupied by terrorists in their official leadership and terrorists who are running as basically militias across the country. You tell the parents of these National Guardsmen about the symbolism of quote unquote peacekeeping in Syria, which is again run by Al-Qaeda, who is our enemy, who attacked us in 9/11. And is facing a civil war, basically, still ongoing, with ISIS running wild in the rest of the country.
Left and right have agreed in the past that regime change doesn't work. When we got rid of Hussein, we got chaos and more terrorism. When we got rid of Gaddafi, chaos and more terrorism.
But Senator, we're here now, though. But we're here.
Yeah. We're not really here. We got 50 people. We're not
here.
doing anything.
Yeah, but frankly,
50 people is very symbolic.
Hold on.
And that is why it kept Turkey from invading.
You tell their parents
Isn't that true?
You tell the parents of those 50 kids how great the symbolism was when a suicide bomber blows up all 50 kids.
But didn't it keep Turkey from invading?
No, I'm not. No.
Gave
you tell
Turkey
their parents.
the green light.
You tell their parents why they're there.
But isn't that true?
You tell their parents why they're there.
Isn't it true that Turkey did not invade?
And Pat Buchanan's quote on this, which is morbid but true, is that terrorism is the price of empire. And that's just correct based on all the available evidence that we have, all these events, attacks on embassies, attacks on our troops like we just saw over the weekend. It's absolutely unnecessary that we would have troops in Syria. If someone explained to me, number one, why do we, don't just give me these vague reasons. Like I saw on Fox News earlier, we had people asking, why are we still in Syria? And you have these senators and congressmen saying, for national security purposes. No, I want sometime. Does anyone ever feel obligated to actually explain to me, like I'm a normal human being, why we need troops in Syria and why we need troops anywhere else in the world right now? Explain to me, you say national security interest. Actually explain it to me past the slogan. Like, give me a reason why it is in our interest to have 200 troops in Syria. And by the way, if we ever got into trouble in Syria and we, for some reason, needed to act in Syria, what are 200 troops going to do? What's the point of having such a little amount of troops in Syria? If 200 troops is what we need in Syria, why not more? Why not more in Syria? If we need these 200 troops so desperately, then what's the problem with sending more? It's just obvious because we only have the 200 troops in Syria that we don't even need them in Syria. We just feel this bizarre empire mindset that we need to have a presence everywhere to act on a moment's notice, when in reality it's doing more harm than good because we have no reason to put our young men in harm's way. When we, again, in a country that's literally run by Al-Qaeda and has ISIS running around recklessly. So it's absolutely insane. We should pull out of Syria now, bring all the troops home from all over the world, close down every base around the world. There is no reason to have U.S. troops in Syria or anywhere else. So that's where we'll end it off for today. A lot of big news out of the Middle East. Well, be sure to subscribe, like this video down below. Be sure to follow me on all my social medias to stay updated on all the latest from these war zones around the world. And thank you guys so much for watching. Again, please be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good day.
It is about who we are. It is about what we believe.
They're building up this case just like we did in Iraq. Build up the war propaganda. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
The more you tell the truth, the stronger you become.
Mr. Speaker, we're not rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic tonight. We're putting coal in the boiler and setting a course for the iceberg.